Hello, welcome to our session. For this meeting, we're going to explore the different tools of multicultural education. These tools can be useful for students, teachers, and for curriculum. Here's our graphic for our course outcomes. First, we're going to look at tools of multicultural education for teachers and students. These tools for teachers and for students include stories that portray cultural conflict and stories that celebrate diversity. Using literature that portrays different cultures without stereotypes or prejudice is an excellent way for students to learn about multiculturalism. Many novels and stories provide a wealth of cultural diversity. By using these wonderful trade books in the classroom, teachers can promote both understanding and pride among their students. A natural breakdown exists between books that accurately portray the conflict that many groups were forced to endure and books that celebrate the rich diversity that can be found in America today. These books are terrific tools for helping students explore geography, history, literature, science, and art, but most of all, they help bring students of all backgrounds together. And next we'll look at an example. One great example of a story that celebrates diversity is Baba Yaga, the Russian Cinderella story. This is a wonderful story to introduce students to the many different versions of Cinderella from all around the world. Anne Frank and Frederick Douglass were both held in bondage, each in a different way. Frank was kept from the public eye for fear she would be caught and killed by the Germans. Even before she went into hiding, she had to abide by so many restrictions that she had no freedom at all. On the other hand, Douglass was born a slave and had never known what it was like to be free. These two stories examine cultural conflict. As you can see, when we use and look at books that focus on different cultures, we can sort them into one of two main categories: books that explore cultural conflict and books that celebrate diversity. We're going to take a look at a few examples, and you may just want to choose one of these for your final project. For now, you can use the page of story summaries in your note guide to sort the stories. First, read each story summary, then decide whether this story is celebrating diversity or exploring cultural conflict. Finally, write either cultural conflict or celebrate diversity by each story summary. Remember, we are looking for cultural conflict, which is different from literary conflict that appears in almost every story. You can go ahead and pause this video while you complete the worksheet. Let's check the stories. Throughout history, racial groups have been in conflict with one another. There are many wonderful pieces of literature that will help children learn more about the conflicts that have occurred. These are the group of stories that explore cultural conflict. In each story and in each summary, the main character experiences suffering and, at the very least, internal conflict due to the struggles of the time period in which the story is set. Please correct your worksheet if necessary. I'm just going to go ahead and show the stories that explore cultural conflict and show their summaries before we continue. Now we'll take a look at stories that celebrate cultural diversity. These stories celebrate cultural diversity. Stories like these help students learn about various cultures in a way that is accessible to everyone. Teachers need to be careful to choose stories that do not generalize or stereotype. The goal is for students to understand that all people are different. We all have different backgrounds and heritages, and therefore we have different ways of looking at the world. Another area where we can infuse multicultural education tools is the curriculum. The curriculum can become more authentically multicultural by incorporating the Bloom's-Banks matrix and by using differentiated instruction. We're going to start by looking at how lessons can be revisited and how the curriculum can be transformed. This framework was created by Ford and Harris, the Bloom's-Banks matrix framework. They relied on the models of Banks, who we talked about before, who is basically the guru of multicultural education, and Bloom, who we know has created the Bloom's taxonomy. Ford and Harris intersected the two models. This will be a quick review of Bloom's taxonomy. For the lower levels of Bloom's, or the foundational levels, students are taught facts, asked to recall information, and then asked to apply what they have learned in a limited fashion. For example, making a timeline. These levels tend to be teacher-directed, leaving little room for students' initiative and imagination. At the higher levels, students are required to explore, examine, critique, and combine what they have learned. This more child-centered approach encourages students to hypothesize or predict and to be creative in their efforts and with their products, more indicative of divergent thinking. Now we'll take a closer look at Banks and his hierarchies. Banks identified 4 levels or ways to infuse multicultural content into the curriculum. Like Bloom's model, Banks's framework is also presented in a leveled or a ranked order. In reference to Banks's framework, each level is more authentic or more multicultural than the next. This graphic displays the levels from no emphasis on multicultural education to total integration. We'll take a closer look at each level and consider pros, cons, and promises for each. But first, we'll do a little activity. For this activity, you can read a short lesson plan idea and decide to which level of Banks they belong. Simply write the number of the level beside the activity. All you have to do is write the number of the level beside the activity. Level 1 is the most basic or least authentic example of a multicultural activity idea, and level 4 would be the highest and most ideal example of a multicultural activity. Now, since we haven't really gone over the different levels yet, what you are doing is more of a prediction, just to kind of get you interested or just to see how your rankings are before we go through the levels. You can go ahead and pause the video and write the levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we'll take a closer look at each level and check our predictions. Level 1 is the contribution approach. It focuses on heroes, holidays, and discrete cultural elements. The positive for this level is that it is many teachers' first step toward including multicultural aspects in the curriculum. But there's also a problem with these beginning levels. The problem is that students may acquire only a superficial understanding of diverse groups. And here are some examples. We'll start with the level 1 idea from our worksheet, where students are just reading basic facts about the heroic actions of Harriet Tubman presented on a coloring page. In theory, this would be in isolation to any other kind of readings or study about Harriet Tubman. Another level 1, create a model of the Underground Railroad. And finally, create a timeline of events leading up to the Civil War. Now we'll move on to level 2, which is the additive approach. Content, concepts, themes, and perspectives are added to the curriculum without changing its structure too much. It's a little bit more involved than level 1 because it's more extensive. For example, Black History Month. The positives are that it allows students to concentrate on curriculum targets and multicultural themes. But it also comes with the problem. Students may fail to understand how the predominant culture interacts with culturally diverse groups. Now we'll take a look at our level 2 examples. Once again, we'll begin with the example from our worksheet. This activity goes beyond the first level as it explores lengthier themes, but only with a bit more depth. Learn and perform a skit or song for the Black History Month assembly. And another example is summarize the racial barriers faced by the protagonist of a multicultural novel. Moving on to level 3, the transformation approach. For this level, the curriculum is transformed. The structure of the curriculum is changed to enable students to view concepts, issues, events, and themes from the perspectives of diverse racial and cultural groups. The higher levels each come with a promise. The promise for the transformation approach level is that children are transformed and empathy is promoted. Now we'll take a look at our level 3 examples, and once again we'll start with the one that's from the worksheet. This qualifies as level 3 because it encourages empathy. Whenever we ask students to put themselves in the shoes of another race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic group, we are encouraging empathy. Describe how slaves might have felt being held in captivity. Develop a survey concerning students' experiences with prejudice in their school or community. And finally, we come to level 4, the social action or community approach. This is not to be confused with social justice. These are long-term projects to help the community or society. Students make decisions on social issues and take actions to help solve issues in the community. The promise for the final level: students become empowered to resolve social issues, problems, and injustices. Once again, for the examples, our first activity appears on the worksheet. This is level 4 because it results in helping the community. That community could be the classroom, the school, or the neighborhood. Additionally, students can imagine how they would address issues from another time and place, and role-play this level as indicated in the second example. Write a 17th century speech addressing political leaders to persuade them to end slavery. For our final assignment, the multicultural literary study, which is due our final class, you will be asked to include multicultural lesson activities. This is the project for which you are picking a story to read that reflects a culture, a race, a socioeconomic status, an ethnicity, or religion that's different from your own. One way to do so is to consider the higher levels of the bank's hierarchy and include a lesson plan idea to reflect a more empathetic or community action approach. We're going to look at an example of creating a lesson activity based on Banks's hierarchy. And we'll do so with my book, which is called The Bronze Bow. It is about the Roman occupation of Israel and the New Testament times. It's a fictional book with real historical events that take place throughout. The main theme is that forgiveness and love overpower hate even in the face of greatest adversity. Daniel is the hero, and his hatred for the Romans is his driving force, until he encounters the greatest example of love, which breaks his bonds of hatred and frees him to become a hero to his family and to his village. At one point in the story, Daniel is harassed and wounded by a Roman soldier. Afterward, he and his friends envision the greatest weapon, the bronze bow. They imagine that this weapon is so strong that it could be used to defeat the Romans' cruelty and occupation. A lesson idea before considering banks. It's not a bad idea. In the story, Daniel's friends give him a home and create a shop for him. They help him and his sister to get back on their feet after the death of their parents. At first, Daniel does not recognize or appreciate what they have done for him, but then he meets Jesus and witnesses his kindness to others and understands the power of kindness over that of vengeance or anger. In this lesson plan idea, students discuss Daniel's transformation and create a poster that features how his change took place. This idea is good, but it does not reach the higher levels of the bank's hierarchy. Here is the revision that more closely reflects Banks's ideas. This revision aims for an even deeper, more empathetic understanding or connection that endeavors towards social action. Students still discuss how and why Daniel changes from an angry, spiteful focus to that of love and loyalty and duty, but they also apply that to situations that may be taking place in their lives and in their schools. They are asked to make a 3-step plan to influence those who are hurting and angry in their family or in their school. Looking ahead, there are additional ways to reflect our course when you create lesson plan ideas for your final project, which is the multicultural literary study. You can strive for lessons that use the Bloom's-Banks matrix, but there are additional ways to revise lesson plan ideas to reflect a deeper multicultural emphasis. Lessons that create a personal connection with students' lives naturally tap into their various culture and values. These lesson ideas can include grand conversation approaches that ask students' opinions or encourage them to share their own experiences and ideas. Lessons that ask students to explore the cultural celebrations and/or conflicts of the highlighted culture encourage students to look at protagonists and settings of stories that represent diversity and teach multiculturalism in an authentic way. The other area where we can encourage multiculturalism in the curriculum is through differentiated instruction. The ways to differentiate include content, process, product, and learning environment. And we'll take a look at some examples. First, differentiating content. This is when the curriculum is modified to include a greater focus on diversity. Resources and materials are multicultural. And looks like our picture of Crispus Attucks is over top of the word diversity. This is our American history example. Often, heroes who are minorities are left out of the curriculum. However, teachers can enhance the curriculum by deliberately focusing on the whole picture of history. For example, students can learn about Crispus Attucks of Native and African American descent. He was the first martyr of the American Revolution and died at the Boston Massacre. Differentiating process. Students' cultural backgrounds and characteristics are given primary consideration in instruction. One example is a Heritage Christmas. For this example, students explore their own cultural heritage and include their research as part of the curriculum. Each child reads and researches how Christmas was celebrated by their ancestors. This picture indicates the wearing of candles of the oldest daughter in the family on Christmas morning in Wales. This is a Welsh Christmas. And another way to differentiate is differentiating product. Students share their learning in various ways with a multicultural focus that addresses issues and solves problems of culturally diverse populations. Practice peace. This is a real-life example shared by a former student. His students created a rap that highlighted the focal points of the school's newly adopted anti-bullying program to sing during morning announcements. And finally, differentiating the learning environment. Teachers use the cultural characteristics of diverse groups to create a learning opportunity where individuals are valued and respected. We've been talking about a multicultural learning environment throughout our course. All right, so those are the tools. Tools for teachers and students, and tools for the curriculum. For this online class, you can print and complete the note-taking guide and bring that with you next time we meet. If you don't have that much paper or you do not have the capabilities of printing, you can do what some of the online students do and just fill out the note-taking guide right on your computer, save it as a new document, and then email that to me. And you can do it paper-free. Thank you for attending this session.